Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. We are on episode 4 and ready to get into something I think is always on a business leader's mind.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
That's the economic climate. It's that mix of forces, those invisible forces that can really make or break even the best business plans.
Oh, absolutely. It's like sailing a ship through, those constantly shifting currents. You need to understand those forces at play if you want to, like adjust your sails and stay on course.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Before we get too far into today's deep dive, let's kind of chart where we've already been. In our first 3 episodes, we talked about how technology, things like e-commerce and automation are changing the game for business. And we also dove into, like, how important ethics are becoming, like a core business principle, everything from fair wages to sustainability.
Yeah, that's right.
And we even looked at some companies, like Marks and Spencer. I mean, they're leading the charge in sustainable practices.
Right. All absolutely crucial parts of the business landscape. And they all tie into what we're talking about today. Because, the economic climate really influences every single decision a business makes.
Exactly.
Everything from like what products they're going to launch to, how they're going to manage their workforce. It's a big deal.
So let's just unpack what we even mean when we say economic climate. Is it basically just the overall economic health of a certain region?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's kind of like a snapshot of all those different factors
Right.
that can affect, like how consumers behave and how businesses operate.
Gotcha.
Things like income levels, unemployment rates, and even, those interest rates that everyone's always talking about. And these factors, they can create a whole bunch of challenges,
Right.
but they can also create some really interesting opportunities that businesses need to figure out how to navigate.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Let's break it down even further. I know you mentioned income levels earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I can definitely see how that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Like if people have more money in their pockets, they're probably going to spend more, which is good news for businesses.
Exactly. When incomes are, rising faster than prices, basically, when people have more disposable income, that extra cash they can spend on things that aren't essential or, maybe even treat themselves to something a little luxurious, well, that can lead to higher sales for businesses
I see.
and potentially bigger profits, too, especially for those businesses that are selling, those non-essential goods that people don't absolutely need.
But then what happens when things go the other way? Like when prices are rising faster than incomes, eating away at people's purchasing power.
Yeah, that's when things get a little, more challenging because in that scenario, consumers have to start prioritizing those essential expenses.
Of course, yeah.
Groceries, rent, utilities, all the things you can't really live without. And then those fun purchases, those little splurges, they kind of have to take a back seat.
Right, because suddenly these things aren't so important.
Exactly. And that's when businesses selling, those non-essential items or maybe luxury goods, they might start feeling the pinch. They might see their sales go down and then have to rethink their whole strategy, maybe adjust their prices or find a way to offer more value or even try to target a different customer segment entirely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have a real world example of that happening?
Oh, absolutely. A great example is the 2023 energy crisis in the UK. That was a real wake-up call for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it was. I mean, energy bills just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
It wasn't just businesses feeling that pressure. Consumers felt it too, right?
Exactly. Consumers really felt the squeeze, and it affected how they were spending across the board. I mean, remember all those headlines about how people were cutting back on, eating out at restaurants or holding off on making those bigger purchases?
Oh, yeah, totally. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's kind of wild, right? I mean, how a shift in one area, like energy prices, can have these ripple effects throughout the whole economy.
It is, and it shows
Yeah.
you just how interconnected everything really is.
Right.
And it also underscores why it's so important for businesses to stay, informed about what's going on in the economic climate.
Yeah.
They can't just react after the fact. They need to be anticipating these changes and adjusting their strategies accordingly.
Well, that's easier said than done, right?
Sometimes it is, yeah.
Okay, so speaking of adapting, another big factor in the economic climate is unemployment, right?
Yeah.
Because when people are out of work, it impacts their spending power, which in turn affects businesses too.
Definitely. It's a whole chain reaction with, both immediate consequences and then some of those longer-term consequences as well.
Okay, so high unemployment usually means lower consumer spending, right?
And that can lead to reduced sales and maybe even force some businesses to make some tough decisions about, their own staffing.
Right, exactly.
So, on the surface, high unemployment just seems like bad news for pretty much everyone. But I've heard there can be some, like, unexpected benefits for businesses in certain situations.
That's true. It's not always so black and white. While high unemployment does present a lot of challenges, it can also create some opportunities, especially for those businesses that are hiring. Because think about it, a large pool of applicants can actually make recruitment faster and potentially even lead to, lower wage costs as competition for those jobs increases.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Potential downsides, but then also some potential strategic advantages if a business knows how to leverage them.
Exactly. And the COVID-19 pandemic, that was a pretty dramatic illustration of
It
this.
was.
Certain sectors, like retail and hospitality, they got hit hard with layoffs as, lockdowns and restrictions forced all these closures. And then on top of that, consumer spending was down.
Right. Whereas other businesses, like the ones in e-commerce or those offering online services, I mean, they actually did pretty well in that same environment, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, they thrived because they were already in a position to meet that huge surge in demand for, shopping online and using remote services.
It's true. I remember being so thankful for those businesses at that time.
Yeah, me too.
And think about companies like Amazon. I mean, they needed a ton of new workers to manage all of their, like, booming online operations.
Right, they needed people.
And luckily, they had a huge pool of applicants to choose from.
Yeah.
So that allowed them to scale up really fast and, meet that unprecedented demand. It's wild.
It is. And, it really shows how a crisis can create winners and losers, like within the same economic environment. And it just underlines how important it is for businesses to be adaptable.
It really does.
Those that could see the changes coming and were able to adjust their strategies, those were the ones that came out ahead.
It's about being proactive,
Right. Gotcha.
not just reactive. Okay, well, speaking of adapting, I think it's time to bring in a real-world example, a case study
Yeah.
of a business that was able to successfully navigate, those tough economic conditions. I'm ready for it.
Okay, so let's talk about Greg's.
Greg's. Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone in the UK loves a good Greg's sausage roll. But, beyond just their delicious treats, they actually offer a pretty compelling example of how a business can adapt, like when things get tough. So what were some of the challenges they were facing?
Well, like a lot of businesses, Greg's was dealing with, those rising costs,
Right.
flour, energy, all those essential ingredients for a bakery. They were all getting more expensive,
Yeah.
which put a lot of pressure on their profit margins.
I bet. And they were also dealing with the same, like, reduced consumer spending that we were just talking about, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Everyone's tightening their belts a bit.
It's a classic double whammy. Rising costs and then shrinking demand.
Oof. Not good.
No, but instead of just, accepting the situation, Greg's did something really smart. They adapted.
Okay, so tell me they didn't start selling, like, Greg's branded caviar or something. What did they do?
Not quite. They actually focused on what they do best. Affordability. They introduced a bunch of new meal deals
Okay.
and, some lower priced items to try to attract those budget conscious customers.
Sure.
And they even expanded their menu, with some lower cost savory options and sandwiches so they could appeal to a wider range of people.
So they were kind of responding to those changing consumer preferences, right?
Right.
Like recognizing that people might be looking for something a bit more, substantial than just a quick pastry on the go.
Exactly. They saw a need for like those convenient and affordable meals,
Yeah,
and they stepped up to provide them.
I like it. What else?
Well, to make things even easier for those busy customers, they also invested in, a mobile app.
Huh?
So people could use click and collect services.
Smart move. People are so busy these days, they value that convenience. Being able to order ahead, skip the line, just grab their food and go.
Exactly. And alongside all these like customer-focused changes, they also started to implement, some sustainability measures,
Good.
trying to reduce their energy usage in all their stores.
Yeah, got to keep those utility costs down.
Right.
So they were doing a lot, meeting those customer needs, managing their costs, and trying to act sustainably all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? What was the result of all these efforts?
Well, the outcome was pretty impressive. Even though the economic climate was, really tough, Greg's actually managed to increase their market share.
Wow.
Yeah. And they held on to their reputation as like a go-to place for value for money food. They didn't just survive the storm, they came out even stronger.
That's a great example. And such a good lesson for any business out there. It's
Yeah.
not just about surviving when things are tough. It's about finding ways to innovate and adapt.
I agree.
Greg's really understood their customer and what they valued.
Yeah.
And that's how they were able to thrive.
Totally. It brings us back to, another really critical factor that shapes the economic climate, interest rates.
Okay.
It might seem kind of dry at first, but trust me, it has a huge impact on businesses.
All right, convince me. What's so interesting about interest rates?
Well, think of interest rates as like the cost of borrowing money.
Right.
When those rates are low, borrowing money is cheaper. So it's easier for businesses to, invest and expand and hire more people. It's like a green light for the economy.
Right. So low interest rates can actually stimulate the economy
Mhm.
and kind of encourage businesses to take risks and grow.
Yeah.
But what happens when rates start going up?
When interest rates rise, borrowing becomes more expensive. So suddenly that loan payment for, equipment or property, it gets bigger.
Yeah,
And that can make businesses think twice before taking on more debt.
I can imagine.
And it can make consumers more hesitant, too, about those big purchases, like a new car or a house.
Right. So higher interest rates are kind of like hitting the brakes on the economy.
Yeah, exactly. And central banks, like, the Bank of England, they actually use interest rates as a tool.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, to try to manage inflation
Okay.
and just like generally keep the economy stable.
Makes sense.
If inflation's going up too quickly, they might raise those interest rates to cool things down a little, even if it means, potentially slowing economic growth a bit.
So it's a real balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
Trying to find that sweet spot,
Yeah,
encouraging growth, but also keeping inflation under control.
it is. And for businesses, understanding how interest rates work and how they might change, that's crucial,
Right.
especially when they're making decisions about, investments or pricing or even hiring.
It's like another piece of the puzzle.
It is.
Another factor to consider when you're trying to navigate that complex economic world.
Exactly. And it highlights just how interconnected all these forces are, just like we've been talking about.
It's fascinating. I feel like this deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've covered a lot today. I mean, from understanding what the economic climate even is to exploring how those factors like income and unemployment and interest rates can impact businesses in like all sorts of ways,
Yeah.
positively and negatively.
Right. It has been a whirlwind of information.
It has.
Hopefully our listeners are walking away feeling, a bit more informed and maybe even a bit empowered.
Empowered to navigate those choppy economic waters.
Exactly.
I think so too. We've seen how these seemingly invisible forces can really shape the business world. And we've also learned from examples like Greg's that, with the right approach, businesses can not only get through tough times, but actually come out even stronger. It really does. It goes
Yeah.
back to that adaptability we keep talking about.
Yeah, it's really the key, isn't it? If you want to navigate the economic climate well, businesses that can kind of anticipate the changes coming and really understand, like, their customers and what they need, and then adjust their strategies. I mean, those are the ones that are going to, not just survive, but really thrive.
I think you're right. And I think we've given our listeners today a pretty good understanding of what the economic climate is and how it impacts business.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone listening to kind of look around, look at the businesses that you interact with every day and just like pay attention to what they're doing. What choices are they making? How are they adapting to, all the things we've been talking about today? It's like a real world business school happening all around us.
I love that. It's like a scavenger hunt for business insights.
It is.
We can learn so much just by observing and, asking questions.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Especially in the business world.
So true. Well, before we go, I want to say a huge thank you to Google Notebook LM for their incredible AI assistance in helping us put this episode together.
Yeah, their support has been invaluable.
It really has. And of course, we couldn't do it without the amazing team at Audio Dialogue. They make us sound so good.
A big thanks to them, for sure.
And this deep dive was a PEELC Strategy production. They're always bringing you insightful and engaging content.
It's what we're passionate about. Making these complex topics a little more accessible and hopefully even a little bit fun.
I think we did it. Well, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, happy diving, everyone.
Happy diving!